All right. Some of you might know my guest here. We just decided like an hour ago that we were just going to come on and do this. So we are lost sheep. Actually, we're not that lost, are we, Jonathan? We had a little prayer before
Yeah,
we
we're
got
pretty good.
on. We're pretty good, right? But Jonathan, he's not just a subscriber of mine. You guys probably see him a lot. Haystacks. He goes by Haystacks, right?
The haystack, yeah.
The Haystack, not Haystacks. Sorry. When I think of Haystacks, I think of fried taters. Anyway, hold on a second. Let me get a drink. So I emailed him and I said, "Shoot me your number," because I feel bad. I felt bad because he posts stuff on a group that I have that I totally neglect, like a neglected child. That Facebook group, but it's still there. And Jonathan has his own channel. What's the name of your channel?
The haystack.
The Haystack. And I like the things that he talks about. I just haven't had time to really go on. And I'm like, you're an idiot, Troy. He comes and he supports you and he agrees with a lot of the things you talk about. So I thought I would give him a call, and I did, and that was about an hour ago, I think. And we decided to come on. Uh, One thing that we got into, and we're not going to get into too much detail of it, but he was talking about his background in, I don't know, do you want to mention what we talked about a little bit to
Yeah,
the point, and then we'll segue into why we're talking about it, I guess.
yeah. So we're just talking about some of my background and get to know me a little bit better. I shared a little bit of what brought me into Malad. This is one of the areas that I had served uh, in the mission, but uh, well, I served in the mission area, not directly in the town. But I also got called back here as a state trooper and was stationed here and had gone through all the training and saw a side of things that you don't typically see. And from there, went on to other positions. Um, and a lot of that was through the manipulation of particular people in power who were trying to get rid of me. And it took a long time for me to realize where that was coming from. So a little bit of this Gadianton stuff.
Right, and the reason we were talking about that is because I live in Central California, and my wife and we both kind of grew up here. I've lived in other parts of the United States. She's visited other parts of the United States, but primarily we lived here. And I think that, would you agree, Jonathan, that everybody's in this mode where the grass is probably even politically and ideologically greener somewhere else? You know, and you have people leaving California, Latter-day Saints, not just Latter-day Saints, but I would say people that are wanting to preserve traditional values, that are tired of taxation, that are tired of the unrest, political unrest, and the obvious intentional blatant upheavals, political upheavals that are the indoctrination basically of what's going on. And so you have people leaving California thinking, okay, let's go to Idaho, let's go to Utah. But then as you and I were talking, it's not always it's not like it's Zion where you're at either. and and the reason we came to that conclusion is because where the church is probably more concentrated and focused, driven, and where people are wanting to do what's right, you're going to have a pushback, right?
Yeah, I think we've had this pattern of even reading through scriptures how people are trying to flee to something or be preserved. The Lord preserves his people. And there was a talk given by in the Discord Journal of Discourses by Brigham Young where he says we're not asked to build an ark anymore. We're not asked to flee into Egypt or out of Egypt anymore. Right now, we're asked to keep the commandments. And here, where we're trying to think of how to escape, the discomfort that we're experiencing or political upheaval, what we're it seems like we're really being called to do is flee to Zion, which is the covenant keeping, which temple ordinances. It's those. That's the last stand. There's no place else to go on earth. Everyone else came to the U.S. Everyone flooded to the U.S. I think it's Salt Lake Temple. They put up that quote from Isaiah, which says all nations will flow into it, and that was just put up as part of the renovation. And I think that is speaking more towards not so much Salt Lake City, but more towards the temple. So there's a lot of upheaval and moving around. Grass is always greener, but in the end, the last place to go to is the last stand, and that's our the mountain of the Lord. It seems
Yeah.
to me, at least.
Well, and that I think that's part of the reason why Zion is not right now a geographical, and some might disagree with me. Some will say that Utah is Zion. I don't think that's necessarily the case.
I
Uh,
would agree.
I'm not saying that. Okay, so the point is that Joseph Smith said that Zion was somewhere specific. Later on, he said it was North and South America, and then it grew to Zion is wherever the stakes of Zion are. And the same goes with where you're going to build your proverbial ark, I guess. It is the fortress of your home is where Zion is. This is Zion. The choices you make and the connection that you make with Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ, going to the temple, that's Zion. Zion will be a geographical place someday. But right now, we face Gadianton moments. I mean, did you want to talk about a little bit what you mentioned to me, or was that basically it?
Actually, yeah, I think there's a way I can form it that doesn't really uh, on paint a target on people's back because I don't want to be accusatory or anything.
Right,
What I
no.
do want
And
to
you
do
can
is
be
share an
vague,
experience.
but you could be very vague, but at the same time get the point across, I think, if you want to.
Yeah. So to me, going through this whole experience, I went from being a state trooper doing my job and having wonderful experiences, helping people getting this knowledge, getting more familiar with it, um, then to being asked to resign. And when I asked why, they're like, well, I don't know. There's nothing we could really pinpoint. And so I thought, okay, maybe I'm just not fitting in. So I did a short stint contract over with Northrop Grumman. That was cool, and then became interested in felony parole and ended up becoming a parole agent, promoting very quickly. But then recognizing that there were some people who did not like this, especially when I started opening up an office here in town as a satellite office. There was a particular person who went out of his way to make things uncomfortable, lots of petty things. So I never did anything wrong, but yet this guy was on my case. And I later found out that relationships of a political nature are far more valuable than actual performance, even measurable performance. And even if it's a superficial threat of a political attraction, like, hey, I'll play ball with you if you pull your guy out of my town, kind of thing.
Right.
And And I knew that was the case for a year. I could sense it coming. I was being warned by people. And so I just kept very, very detailed records. And then they asked me to resign. I said, no, I have no reason to do that. This is ridiculous. And so they followed through, and I said, I want an investigation. And they said no. So they just flat out fired me. So I asked post council if there would be, if they could do an investigation, which they did. And they came out and said, well, no, you're clear here, and you retain all credentials. Um, yeah, you're good.
What
So
what do you
that took a year. And to
what
me, it
was
was a
it
very Joseph in Egypt moment of holding my peace and just going through it, because there were lots of blessings in my personal life that came along the way.
was it something, I mean, not to get in, I don't know, you don't, you told me before that you can't disclose a lot of what happened and that you're not under a gag order anymore, but still, nonetheless, who wants any reprisal after all of that, right? But
Yeah.
you did mention, was it something ideologically not right, or you just weren't a yes man? Period. Your values were more important than obedience to something that might not have the same values, right?
Yeah. Um, in law enforcement, they want yes men because you don't always have the full picture in an operation or anything like that. You get something, and then you just, yes, we're all team players. We all go ahead with that. But then there's some instances where they want this yes man mentality to continue to apply. Things like I can't mention that. And so when you start questioning some of those things, they're like, one of these is not like the other. What do you? I just know who writes my paycheck. Who writes your paycheck? And I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
okay.
But the
And
okay, no, go ahead. Sorry.
no, no, you go ahead.
So okay, so the reason this intrigued me, Jonathan, and you're probably wondering why did Troy want to talk about this, was because I don't live in Idaho, I don't live in Utah, but I know there's lots of Latter Day Saints. And would you say that the majority of the people you worked with were members of the church?
No, I
No?
mean
Okay.
here, this area tends to be a lot more LDS. The people I specifically worked with mostly were not. They're
Okay.
mostly
Okay.
Christian. There's a huge Christian base out here,
Okay.
and so there's already this preconceived notion of what Mormons are, or Latter Day Saints are. However, even working as a parole agent, the two people I trusted most were Lutherans. These two Lutheran officers.
Okay. So do you think it had something to do with you being LDS?
I think it had something to do with honesty and integrity.
Okay. So it had nothing to do with your religion or anything like that. Yeah.
Well, I think that's used as collateral or supplemental stuff where they may try and falsify a report and try and bulk it up with fluff to try and sell it to somebody based on their audience. So if I have a very left leaning administrator over the entire state, they're going to cater it that way. And they're going to say, well, he is involved in the GOP and this is what he does on his free time. It's stuff that has nothing to do with anything. That typically, if you were to send it into the court, it would be rejected. But where it's a department, they kind of just they get to gauge their own feelings, and you do whatever the top person says, and you don't ask questions because you don't want to stir the hornet's nest.
Right. So let's segue here. We talked about this together, and we both came to the conclusion. He and I, we had these probably similar epiphanies that it's so much alike with what when we talk about the indoctrination of scholarship, latter LDS scholarship. I know that's kind of a almost might seem like apples and oranges to people that are hearing this, but it relates because we can get into a frenzy or a group, right? We could get into a clique, or we can get a mindset, or we could be agenda driven so much that the indoctrination of something can
Saturate.
saturate and trump the truth, right?
Yeah.
And I've heard plenty of people that have not just scholars, but people that don't want anything to do with some of these Latter day Saint scholars. I'm not saying they're all bad. They're good. A lot of them are good people. I'm not saying they're bad, but I'm saying a lot of them are afraid to talk about certain things because it's not politically correct within the church, within their circle of people. And there's some pressure. I've talked to some people that left it and said I don't want anything to do with it anymore because of that. The other thing we were talking about is it's we mentioned the NSA being in Utah and groups like the CIA, like lots of Latter-day Saints taking jobs in the CIA. We're not saying that those groups as a whole are bad, right? But
No, we're not.
but
We're not saying that, but I do have an experience there for you.
okay, go ahead.
So I was attending Utah State or Utah Valley University studying psychology, and I started getting more interested in national security. There, they had a bunch of CIA agents go and they do a speech, maybe a little recruiting here and there, and it was very. I could tell very quickly what they what they wanted and what their intentions, where their heart was, and they even offered career advice to me. And right off the bat, it was just a dark, not good feeling, and it was 110% political feeling to me. And
What were some of the things that they were offered?
so, oh,
Like
like
the ends justifies the means kind of thing?
it was
Like you
more
got to
like
be bad in order for the good to come about, or
it was more like the way when people interpret scripture, interpret history, the way they recite history back to you kind of gives you a good understanding of where their heart is, where their intentions are, where their focus is. These people, for example, hated Abraham Lincoln, like
these are people in the NSA or CIA?
CIA.
Okay, so this is something you were trying out for, more or
No,
less.
I was just listening to a conference,
Oh, okay. Sorry,
and
sorry.
two
Okay, I missed that part.
agents
Okay.
spoke with me after and said, "Oh, you're studying psychology? Stay with that." And but my experience even in that psychology sector was we had to do these surveys, and one of these surveys was asking about belief in God, except the questionnaire was more like, do you know that God does not exist? Have you been told that God does exist? Do you think you believe in God, or do you not believe in God? And I'm like, where's the one that simply says I believe in God, or that I know
Wow.
that God exists? It didn't have that. And so I kept going through, and it was just more questions like this. And I stopped and said, based on this, I don't want this to hold any credibility. It seems that no matter what you answer, it's going to lead all to the same conclusion. So this is highly manipulated, and I don't think that this session should hold credibility. So I reported it to the department. Next thing they did is they filled up all my points and blocked me from going to further surveys. And then I had mandatory sensitivity training that I had to accomplish that was given by the department or the school
This
district.
was the okay. Did you mention what type of? I don't know if you mentioned it or not. The type of peace officer thing you were doing.
This was studying psychology at
Oh,
Utah
okay.
Valley
Okay. So
University.
you hadn't been. You didn't mention the two occupations you had, right?
Yeah,
You
I
don't want
that was
you don't
before I
want me
went
to
into
mention,
those.
but I noticed you didn't specifically mention them. You don't want me to mention them.
You can mention those. I just went to school before all that.
Okay. So one, you were a trooper, right?
Yeah.
And then and you mentioned the other one where you were in parole. But Were these Latter-day Saints too, that some of these people that you were working around? And
There's very few, and they have this balance, kind of like probably what you would see Daniel have. They found this thing where they just keep their mouths shut and they just do their job and
so
they
they
stick.
actually okay, because I wanted to ask that. Is there some I wonder if there's some cognitive dissonance amongst Latter-day Saint people that are in covert operations and CIA and NSA and FBI. If they separate things, the job is over here and the gospel's over here. How can you separate? How do you can't do that, in my opinion.
Well, the big recruiting places, BYU, like the Utah schools where you have a high religious population, that's a good place to recruit from. But then you sift through your whole training period. It's sifting through, and they don't care if you meet all the requirements. They want to see if you're the type of person that they want. They care more about that trust level, and that trust level could be, yeah, you do anything for me, or it could be, um, you think like I do, kind of thing. So this is how they sift people through, and they'll target the ones they want and really drive them out. The thing is that they recruit out of these religious schools because religious schools, that's where you get
People
your
have
best
integrity.
operators. They believe in God, so because of that, they have a thing that drives them past what people tend to think that they could
Which is
generally do.
interesting. It almost seems like it's kind of manipulative because the reason I'm into this right now is because of Tim Ballard and that Sound of Freedom.
Yeah.
And he talks about how they came to him and said, well, you believe in God. We know you have a strong belief in God. And only somebody that has a strong belief in God could do this. But at the same time, these people that are recruiting him could give two blanks that he's pious and that he's religious, because the same people that are asking him that weren't necessarily religious themselves. But they know, it almost is like, do they want religious people because they have integrity and they can trust them, or they can control them better
So here's the huge
because they
separation.
think they're kind of sheeple types? Does that
They,
make sense?
yeah, they do want
And
yes
half of
men.
them are, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but half of them are sheeple and don't have a conviction in the gospel of Jesus Christ that join these organizations, and the other half do and probably don't last very long. Like Tim Ballard, he's like, I'm out. I'm saving these kids, and I'm getting the hell out. Go ahead.
Yeah, because they do like yes men and religious society. It's easy for religious society to accept more government. It's easy for them to trust authority because they're already accustomed to doing that. And they know that they have a clean history, so they don't have to worry about leaks. You don't have to worry about slip ups. These people, they care about the way they live inside and outside. So they're not a liability. So what the first thing they're checking is this person a liability or not? But then you also have things like, what was it on the Sean Ryan show? You have Dr. Stephen Greer, who says that there's these operators that are distinctly sought out because they're sociopathic. And I can tell you, they do psychological testing.
That's true. However, Stephen Greer, I'm skeptical about him a little bit, but that's
Mm-hmm.
just me. That doesn't mean that he's not throwing truth out there.
Well, I
But
could tell you based on the
that's my
people
opinion.
that they hired. I know for at least the troopers, they want more law enforcement. For parole, they want more counselor, and they want to phase one out more one way, phase the other more another way.
Yeah.
Um,
And even
and
with, what about like the more covert, high up federal, the federalized groups? They want more psychologists, don't they?
yeah, they want basically, if you're thinking like special operation teams, those guys are professionals with everything. They're engineers. They're people who think through problems. They're people that you could put in any situation. They will become a professional in whatever that area is,
Right.
because there's that level of trust, and that's that level of dedication and the person's level of intellect.
and they look at that as strength. To them, that is somebody that's not a coward. They can do whatever is told what to do. But then, where do you draw the line? Like I always go back to that. In the ends justifies the means. The CIA uses that wholeheartedly. The FBI, all of them. You know that the lesser of the two evil decision, or no, I'm sorry, not lesser. That's something different. It is we have to go in there and whatever it takes. Don't worry, the end result is more benevolent than what we're doing now. But then they don't. Then it's used. But then what happens is you got greedy people in there that start doing it for their own spoil, right?
Yeah, you
And
have
and then
separate
and then it's
departments, but
just
then you
doing evil, 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 and saying, "Well, this is what we do to save America." But then there's paybacks, and anyway, go ahead.
yeah you have a variety of different departments and agencies, and then even within those, they're compartmentalized to different groups, and you're not read in on every little thing. Like just because I'm a trooper doesn't mean I'm read in on every operation
No.
someone else is doing. They tell you, they inform you what you need to know, and they say, "Hey, this is going on."
Well, that's
Um,
why I've talked to some people in the FBI. My uncle was in the FBI, and he says a lot of times the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing.
that's government
There's
right there.
there's compartmentalization. There's declassify. There's classifying, declassifying. There's it's a like they say. There's an inner circle. Then there's an outer circle. Then there's a more outer circle, and then sometimes the whole organization doesn't even know what the other organization's doing.
Yeah, something I like to do is when I'm on a project or anything like that, I like to see I like to see big picture. And the hard part is whoever you're working for, it's like if you ask what what the tasks were preparatory for your task, you're looked at very skeptically. Like, why does that matter to you? And I'm like, because I want to understand how this functions. I want to understand how this develops. I want to understand motive. I want to understand this. But they're like, you don't need to. You just need to be able to be a cog and do your job. And you don't need to be asking questions. Why do you ask so many questions? And so you might look at it like a parent who a kid is asking 30 million questions every 2 seconds. And you're like, stop asking me questions. Why do you need to? The wind blows. That's just, it happens. Okay. Or is it more like this is part of the compartmentalizing thing? And as soon as you start asking questions, that's ran to your supervisor. And then you're kind of on a list of, not an official watch list, but
Right.
you get a lot more attention than you really need.
I'm looking at the Domestic Surveillance Directorate, defending our nation, securing the citizens. I guess this is the NSA of Utah. Uh, where is this located?
Eagle Mountain, I think.
Yeah. What really bothers me is it's uh where is it? I saw it a little while ago. The name of it is what is it? The Bumble Hive. There it is. Codenamed Bumble Hive. Sounds too much like Deseret or the Beehive State.
S-
You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's funny
That is
because
weird.
um, Facebook also set up all of its servers and data collection area right next to it. Just not too long ago.
So let's not get. I'm not getting conspiratorial, but I do believe in true conspiracies, my friend.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
also believe that there are false conspiracies that are mixed, just like this crap that the left is spewing right now uh, about the sound of freedom. They keep mentioning QAnon, 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 and it has nothing to do with QAnon.
it's like a
This guy
red
really
herring.
he really did these things. He really rescued them. I've seen pictures of him in his temple ceiling. I've seen him with two of the kids that he adopted through some of the things he. Tony Robbins actually went with him on some of his missions. He's not lying about it. This guy's legit,
No.
and
Yeah.
it's just really crazy. But the reason I brought it up and the reason I'm looking at this NSA thing and bringing that up is I know there's good people that work for the CIA. I know there's good Latter Day Saints that work for NSA and CIA.
Yeah.
But isn't it interesting? Where did most of the Gadianton robbers in the Book of Mormon come from? Where was most of the persecution in the early part of the Restoration come from? Where
The
did it
top.
come from? It came from our own people. Where
At the top too.
we at the top, right? We're not penetrated. We're not saying ecclesiastically this has penetrated anything. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying though is anything that penetrates the saints and their goodness and their the gospel or whatever you want to call it, just anything that anytime Satan wants to overthrow the gospel or the saints, he does it with some of the saints. And I does that sound kind of feeble-ish what I said, or
No, I
does
mean,
that
if
make
you look at the
sense?
with all the Israelites and the Jews, it tension, all that stuff, the weakness, always the loss of protection from the Lord always came because of what was happening within. It's kingdom
Corruption,
divided against itself. That's why we're asked right now to be one.
right?
And all these other Christian churches are fracturing. The Jared with Christian Homestead kept mentioning the Methodist Church, how that's fracturing like crazy right now. And
Oh,
that's like one of my
absolutely.
questions is where else are you going to find the Lord's church when all other churches have fractured and gone with every wind of doctrine that Babylon has spewed out? And we're the ones that are united and one when Christ asked us be one.
Yeah, we're being penetrated, but we're still pretty strong because we're the true gospel of Jesus Christ, plain and simple. And the other churches, they don't have the priesthood, they don't have temples, ceilings. I'm not going to apologize forever for saying that we are the true church. I'm not reaching across the aisle and trying to find common ground with other Christians. I believe we both believe in Christ, but I'm still going to, Doctrine and Covenants says I need to declare boldly that this is the truth. And I'm going to continue to do that. And it's not in a condescending way. But yeah, the Methodist Church, all of these churches are crumbling morally because they are the organizations of man with good people that believe in Christ, but they are not run by Jesus Christ. This is his church, and his church will even have wickedness penetrate it big time. But it's the church of the firstborn that comes from the church of the firstborn is not the membership, but they come from the membership, right?
Yeah,
The true
it's living the higher law.
yeah, and being in tune with the Holy Ghost, following the prophet, seeking personal revelation. We still have to follow a prophet and 15 brethren because they make they receive revelation for the church. We receive personal revelation for our personal lives. There's a difference, plain and simple.
Yeah. So here's the thing: is anytime I've heard something come out and people are like, "Oh no, why is the church doing this or that or anything?" It almost seems like I've already gained a testimony of that thing prior to it being introduced. And so it's not that individuals are receiving revelation for the church or anything. It's our hearts and minds are being prepared. This is the pattern that the Lord has always taken, and this is a target that most anti-Mormons will hit on. They're like, Joseph stole this and this from someone, they stole this from someone. Like, if you say that about Joseph, then you're going to say that about Jesus, then you say that about Moses and Abraham.
Right.
Like,
Was it Joseph Smith or Brigham Young that said that those who find fault with the brethren will find fault with Christ eventually? If you find fault with the brethren, when Jesus comes again and he reigns on the earth, eventually you'll be one of those guys that goes, I love Jesus, but did you see what he did the other day? It apostasy doesn't stop with the prophet. Okay? It does not stop there. When you've lost the spirit of truth, you've lost it.
so earlier you were mentioning how in academia there's this dissension, and people are treated differently. I've actually spoken with two archaeologists. One, he's a BYU scholar, Kerry Muhlestein.
Oh yeah, he was
Oh,
on my program. Was
oh,
he on your program?
no, you're the first. I'm not. I just spoke with him
You should have him on sometime. He's a good guy.
so he doesn't go as far as to tell me what I have is wrong or something. He'll just, he's very, very professional about it. He's one of those Daniel types who can be somewhere, but know what he can do. He's serving a good purpose. He's doing the right thing, and he's not going with the flow of Babylon, in my opinion. And I've also spoken with Dr. David A. Faulkner. He's a Christian Egyptologist, um, and mainly focused on New Kingdom writing. He's actually good friends with and had very, very positive things to say about uh, Milstein, which is very odd that a Christian archaeologist, which itself is a difficult area to be in with archaeology, but then have something positive to say about a Latter day Saint archaeologist who
Right.
obviously is someone who researches and defends the Book of Abraham to continue to understand that. So there's an obvious thing that, hey, you should hate this person for this, but yet somehow it's found common ground and still moves forward with producing more work. They just published more information on the Book of Abraham.
Yeah. Yeah. I trust the Savior. I trust also the brethren, like the Joseph Smith papers. I don't know if everything in them is pushed. I don't know. I got to read them and I got to pray about them. I don't, and I would say that they're the best we can do probably to depicting the man Joseph Smith. Most of it is from his journals too, right? And
That's right.
yeah,
So there's a lot of things because he sometimes has a scribe, but early on he did some of his own handwriting. So you do
right,
actually get to see a lot of his own handwriting. And the thing with the early church and the movement out westward, I'm not going to say that we were perfect the whole way out. That we were going to the mountains for a reason. But I think that there's a lot of things. There was dissension within the apostleship there, um,
well,
which,
yeah, and the guys that tarred and feathered Joseph before he would, an example would be that, and then the next day he's given a sermon, and guys out there that helped tar and feather him were in the audience.
yeah,
They were members of the church that stirred up non-members and other members that defected. It wasn't just where some people think it was just all non-members that persecuted the church. It wouldn't have happened if the members didn't get it going.
yeah,
And you know what I mean?
yeah.
And
And for me,
and
you can't destroy the character of someone like that. How are we to take the opinion and character of the people who murdered and hurt the prophet over the man who was killed and forgave his persecutors?
right,
I have yet to be sold on that from a anti-Mormon.
right, yeah. Well, hey, Jonathan, is there any more that you would like to talk about? I think this has been good. I appreciate. How about we leave it there, because I don't want to put too many different subjects here.
Yeah,
And would you like to meet again sometime?
that'd be great.
Okay. Hold on just a second. Let me stop this.